My stepmother left my little sister and me in an old cabin in the woods in the middle of nowhere, then drove away like we were trash. Someone forgot to take out. And the wild part is, my millionaire father had no idea any of it was happening. By the time he finally found us, we were already stumbling along a river with a loyal German shepherd and a bag of stale food, and what he did after he reached us shocked everyone who had ever underestimated that man, including me. So let me take you back to that night, because I still feel it in my chest, like it just happened. The silence hit first, not that peaceful country silence people brag about on vacation. This was heavy, like the whole forest was holding its breath, like the air didn't want to move around us. Behind us was that cabin, if you can even call it that. Just a crooked skeleton of wood boards all warped and sun-bleached, the doorway hanging open like a mouth that had given up talking. The place smelled like mold dust and old smoke, like whoever used to live there packed up their hope and left everything else behind. My little sister Ara was gripping this tiny brown suitcase like it was the only thing keeping her from floating away, the handle digging into her palm so hard I could see the red marks already. And I was holding this rough canvas sack that suddenly felt way too light for what we were about to go through. The only solid thing in that whole clearing was Scout our mom's old German shepherd, standing between us and the cabin, like a furry wall built out of muscle and loyalty. His coat looked almost black in the fading light, ears up, eyes sharp, but every few seconds he'd lean his shoulder against Ara's leg just enough to tell her, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The last sound we heard from Serena, our stepmother, was the crunch of gravel and the engine of her expensive SUV as it turned back toward town, and then nothing, just that suffocating quiet. Ara's voice came out small and thin when she finally whispered, "She's not coming back, James." I tightened my grip on the sack until it scraped my fingers raw and stared straight ahead, because if I looked at my baby sister right, then I was going to break. "Don't cry," I muttered, trying to sound tough and not quite pulling it off. "You promised you wouldn't cry." "I'm not crying," she shot back, lip shaking. Anyway, she said she loved us. She said we were her own little stars. I let out this ugly little laugh that didn't sound like it belonged to a 10-year-old boy, more like somebody who'd seen way too much already. "Stepmothers like her don't get stars," I said. "They get problems and we cost too much." You know what I mean. Some people say the truth, and some people say what sounds pretty. Serena liked pretty. My dad, Arthur Hawthorne, built his life on hard truth. He grew up with nothing, clawed his way up through an industrial world that eats people alive, turned shipping contracts and steel and logistics into a fortune big enough that reporters started calling him self-made, like they knew what that actually meant. He bought the big house, he wore the expensive suits, he flew to Europe on business. But none of that fixed the part of him that broke when my mom died. Money gave him options, it gave him power, but it also left him hollow, and hollow people are easy to play. That's where Serena came in. She slid into his life like a polished jewel. Tall, elegant, from a once rich family that had watched its money evaporate. She spoke the right way, used the right fork, smiled at the right charities. My dad saw stability and a partner to stand next to him, at events someone to help put the family back together. Serena saw a man with fresh money and 2 black children who reminded her of a world she pretended she was above. At first, she played the role perfectly. She hugged us for photos, called us my darlings, talked about boarding schools and travel and opportunities. But while my dad was away working himself sick on oil rigs and in boardrooms, her mask started to slip. It didn't begin with shouting, it began like poison in small doses that build up until you can't breathe. Bedtime stories disappeared, replaced with cold orders to go to bed early. Hot meals turned into plates dropped in the scullery like we were staff who'd done something wrong. She'd look us over with this mix of disgust and boredom like we were stains on her new white couch. "Look at you," she snapped one afternoon, her manicured fingers digging into the collar of my faded shirt. "You look like livestock, and your color. Well, there isn't enough money in the world to polish that." The words hit harder than any slap, and she knew it. She banned us from speaking proper English around her, said it didn't sound natural, then mocked us for the way we talked when we tried to obey. Ara's curls, the same tight spirals my mom had, were animalistic to Serena, and one day she actually came at my sister with scissors, talking about making her look acceptable. That was the day Scout decided he was done watching. He stepped between them, lips pulled back, this low growl ripping up from his chest that made the glasses in the cabinet rattle. Serena froze because for the first time, something in that house scared her more than she scared us. From that day on, she waited to pick on us until Scout was out of the room. She couldn't do much about him, not yet, so she went after the one thing she knew my dad had said was off limits: my mother's locket. It was simple gold, not flashy, but inside was a tiny picture of my mom holding Ara as a baby and a little folded scrap of paper in my mom's handwriting. My dad had told Serena flat out, "You can redecorate whatever you want, but you don't touch that locket." One evening I opened the jewelry box where it always sat, and it was gone. I remember my stomach dropping so fast I felt dizzy. I found Serena in the kitchen admiring a new diamond necklace. When I asked, "Where's my mom's locket?" she didn't even blink. "Sold it," she said, looking right past me honestly. "James, it was outdated. This is much more appropriate for our status." That's when something in me hardened. I didn't have the power to stop her, but I started paying attention, listening around corners, learning how she lied. A few nights later, she thought I was asleep when she took a phone call in the hallway. Her voice was sharp and cold. "Yes, the cabin," she said, "the one by the old logging road near the river, no neighbors for miles. Arthur is on the North Sea rig for another week. The children will be out of sight. By the time anyone questions it, they'll assume the worst." That's when I realized she wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous, and my dad's money had given her reach. When she burst into the kitchen 2 days later, all smiles, saying, "We're going on a little camping trip, a special place just for us to bond," I felt my skin crawl. She put Ara and me into our simplest, light-colored clothes, shoved a few stale biscuits into Ara's suitcase, handed me the sack with a couple of cans and a bottle of water, whistled for Scout, and told him to hop in. We drove until the manicured lawns and security gates faded into scrub and pine trees, until the nice paved roads turned into cracked asphalt and then dirt. At that cabin, the sweetness evaporated. "Go inside," she said, voice flat. "I forgot the water bucket. Stay put." She told Scout to stay, a command he'd been trained his whole life to obey, then turned her back, climbed in the SUV, and drove away without looking back. The sound of gravel under her tires faded, and the silence that followed said everything. "What do we do now?" Ara whispered, fingers tangled in Scout's thick fur. Scout leaned into her, planted between us and the dark line of trees, like he would die before letting anything through. My throat was burning, my heart was pounding, but I knew if I started crying, Ara would fall apart, and we didn't have that luxury. I opened the sack and took stock. Not enough food for even a couple of days, barely any water, no flashlight, no blanket. If we waited for my dad to come back on his schedule, like his assistant said, we wouldn't survive long enough for him to feel that gut instinct he always talked about. I remembered the call. I'd overheard the words old logging road and river, and somewhere in the back of my mind, the map my mom once showed me, her finger tracing how rivers lead to towns, how towns lead to people. "We're not staying," I told Ara, voice low. but steady. When the sun goes down, we walk west until we hit the river. We follow the river until we find a road, then people, then help. Her eyes filled with fresh fear. What about bears or bad men? She asked. There won't be, I lied, forcing a little shrug, and if there are, Scout will take care of it. That's kind of his whole thing. Scout let out one deep woof like he was signing a contract. You know those moments when you're still a kid, but suddenly you realize no one's coming to fix it, not right away, and you have to be more than you feel ready to be. That's where I was when the last light drained out of the clearing and we stepped into the trees. The forest at night felt alive in all the wrong ways, rustling and creaking and whispering every time we moved. The ground was uneven roots like fingers grabbing at our ankles, rocks sharp enough to bruise through our shoes. Ara kept stumbling, and every time she caught herself, I could hear that tiny gasp, that quiet edge of panic she was trying so hard to swallow. We walked for what felt like hours. Maybe it was cold settling into our bones, hunger gnawing at our stomachs. Under the thick branches of an old oak, we finally stopped. Ara slid down the trunk, clutching her suitcase like it was part of her body, and Scout lay down with this heavy sigh, putting his big head in her lap so she could anchor herself to something warm and breathing. I broke one biscuit in half and handed her the bigger piece, kept the smaller one for myself, told her we had to make it last. Scout watched every crumb, but I couldn't spare any for him, not yet, and the guilt of that hit me harder than the hunger. Dad's gonna be mad when he finds out, Ara mumbled around her dry bite. He won't be mad, I said, the lie scraping my throat. He'll be sad, but he'll fix it. I didn't know if I believed that, but I needed her to. We rested maybe an hour, then moved on because stopping too long felt more dangerous than pushing through. Just before dawn, we heard it, the low, rushing sound of water, and when we broke through the trees and saw the river, I almost cried from relief. It wasn't pretty, wide, fast, cold, but it was a path. The ground along the bank was flatter, easier on Ara's swollen feet, and the constant rush of water drowned out some of the scarier forest sounds. Following the river in my head became the plan, the hope, the thin line between us and being a headline nobody read. We were shuffling along this narrow stretch of pebbles, heads down, every muscle aching, when Scout froze. His ears snapped forward, hackles lifting, a low growl building in his chest. For a split second I thought, here comes the bear, just like Ara said, but then I heard it. Not a creaking carriage, the way the story of this place might have gone 100 years ago, but the deep, expensive roar of an engine that did not belong out here. A black armored SUV burst through the brush, upstream, mud and water spraying from its tires as it skidded to a stop, maybe 30 feet from us. The doors flew open, and my father stepped out, except he didn't look like my father, not the version I grew up seeing in magazines or on TV segments. The calm, composed businessman in a perfect suit. This man's tie was crooked, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes wild like he'd been awake for days. For a moment he just stared at us. 2 kids in faded clothes, a loyal dog standing guard, one little suitcase, one sack of cheap food, and I watched something in his face shatter. Then he moved. He ran at us, not caring that his polished shoes were slipping on wet stones, and when he reached us, he dropped to his knees so hard I heard the fabric of his trousers tear. He didn't scoop us into some dramatic movie hug right away. His hands went to work checking our faces, our arms, our legs, looking for bruises, cuts, signs of anything broken or starved or damaged. "My babies, my beautiful babies," he choked out, voice raw in a way I had never heard from him, not even at the funeral. Ara broke first, sobbing into his chest, fingers clutching his shirt like she was afraid he might vanish if she let go. I just stood there, stiff, every part of me wanting to collapse into him, and every part of me remembering that he left us with her. "Why did you leave us with Serena?" I managed, my voice shaking. "Why did you trust her more than you trusted us?" He pulled me into the hug with his free arm and held us both like he was trying to fuse us back into his ribcage. "I didn't know," he said, eyes locked on mine, "James. I swear to you I didn't know. I was on the North Sea oil platform and I couldn't shake this feeling that something was wrong. I told Serena there was one line she was never allowed to cross. She couldn't sell your mother's locket. That was the only thing I asked." He swallowed hard. My secretary David called to update me on some portfolio transfers, and in the middle of it, he slipped in a message, "The locket is gone." That was all I needed. I canceled millions in contracts, took the fastest jet back to the States, walked into the house and found Serena packing. "She had a fake note from you saying you'd run away." His mouth twisted with disgust. "But she left the receipt for the carriage and SUV rental on the counter, and on the back of it, the address. We tracked Scout's collar from there. That's how I'm standing here right now." He stood up, then turned to the driver and said, "Call General Davis, tell him to secure the estate and issue the warrant protocols and get my legal team on a conference call in 10. Then he looked down at Scout, who was still standing like a soldier on duty, and for a second, all the power and fury in my father's face softened. He crouched and wrapped his arms around that big dog's neck. "You protected them," he whispered into Scout's fur. "You did exactly what she asked you to do before she died. You get steak every night for the rest of your life, you hear me?" Scout gave him this slow, serious blink, then licked his cheek like finally someone says it out loud. My dad loaded us into the warm back seat of the SUV, told the driver, "Straight to the city, to the penthouse. The doctor and chef are waiting. Do not stop at the mansion." Then he shut the door, stepped away, and made the calls that turned his private rage into something bigger. He didn't start with a polite complaint to local police. He started with his lawyers, the ones that can make judges blink. Within hours, they had filed a full lawsuit and criminal complaint for kidnapping and child endangerment stacked with evidence. The receipt, the missing locket, the condition we were found in. They froze every account that had Serena's name on it, locked down the mansion, and alerted state police. By sunset, Serena wasn't sipping a drink in some neighboring state. She was pulled over in an expensive car she thought was hers, arrested on the side of the road, with a look on her face that said she truly believed she was the victim. But my dad didn't stop at getting us back or seeing her in handcuffs. He called the household staff together and laid it out. Anyone who had seen Serena's cruelty and stayed silent was fired on the spot and blacklisted from his companies. Anyone who had tried in any way to protect us had a job for life. He didn't just fire Serena. He wiped her out of his life and his business like she'd never existed. They made sure she had no access to the circles she'd used to look down on kids like us. The thing that shocked people most, though, wasn't what he did to her, it was what he did to himself. He realized, sitting in that SUV on the riverbank, that his wealth meant nothing if he wasn't there to protect us. So he stepped down from the day-to-day operations of his company, handed control to the executive he trusted most, the same man whose quiet loyalty had helped send that coded warning about the locket, and decided the next years of his life belonged to James and Ara, not to shareholders. He sold the old house that held all the ghosts and bought a modern ranch surrounded by open land, trees, and sky, with a massive library for us and acres for Scout to run like he was finally off duty. In the penthouse, we got checked by the doctor, fed real food, given clean clothes and hot baths, and that first night I lay there listening to my father sit by Ara's bed reading her a story in a soft voice I hadn't heard since my mom was alive. The silence in that room didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like safety, like doors locked from the inside instead of the outside. Scout stretched out at the foot of the bed, chewing a piece of chicken the chef boiled just for him, and gave me this slow, satisfied look like promise kept kid, you can sleep now. People like to act like justice is simple. Bad person does bad thing, good person fixes it, everyone claps. But standing where I am now, older looking back, it's messier than that. Serena tried to use my dad's absence and his wealth to hurt us, to get rid of the part of his life she didn't want to deal with. My dad turned around and used that same wealth to crush her in a way most people will never have the power to do, making her penniless, friendless, and locked out of the world she thought she deserved. Some people hear this and say, she got what she deserved, end of story. Others ask if he went too far, turned justice into punishment, because he could. Me. I'm still figuring out exactly how I feel about that. But I know this when the forest closed in, and the cabin door yawned open behind us like a grave. I thought we were alone, forgotten, disposable. When that SUV rolled up and my dad dropped to his knees in the mud, I realized there was a part of him that had never stopped listening for us, even with an ocean and a fortune between us. So I'm curious what you think. If you were in my father's place, would you have used every ounce of money and influence you had to make sure your ex never stood up again? Or would you have stopped once she was in handcuffs and out of your children's lives? Do you see what he did as justice or revenge dressed up in a suit? And have you ever seen someone smile in public and be a monster behind closed doors like that? Tell me in the comments how this story sits with you, if it reminded you of something you went through, if you think power corrupts more than it heals, or if sometimes you really do need a man with an armored SUV and a good lawyer to set things right. If this hit a nerve, share it with someone who believes family bonds can survive anything. And if you want more stories like this, messy, painful, but real, stick around and let me know what kind of justice you believe in.